discussion?
We have a PowerPoint presentation that's been prepared between the district and Beneco. Justin and Jeff are here to guide us through it. Both of those mics should work, so make yourself comfortable. Chris is also with us this evening. She's been instrumental in pulling together information for the PowerPoint as well. And if I'm guessing she's going to run the clicker. So we've been charged with coming up with a way of funding OPEB and transitioning to a high deductible health plan. So what we are going to share with you are the fruits of conversations we've been having, discussions, and some of the obstacles maybe that we've been running into. So we're in a sharing mode tonight. And with that, I'll turn it over.
Hi, everybody. I just want to introduce to you our representatives from Beneco. To my left is Justin Andaloro, and to his left is Jeff Schultz, and they have been the people that have been helping us work through some of, it's a very complex process, as you'll soon see. I know that you've received copies of the PowerPoint in your packets this weekend, so if you didn't have a chance to take a look at that, that's okay. We're going to go through it with you this evening. We see this as a multi-step process. We're going to give you some 30,000 foot level information and then move on from there based on our discussion back and forth. The whole idea is to provide a benefit that will help to be used as a retention tool, to also, I think it's in the slide, but make our school district a district of choice, provide something for our employees so that they understand what they're going to be leaving with, and something that's also going to be affordable and something that'll take care of the OPEB liability. So. Cash flow, Lori, do you want to talk about this slide, what this means right now?
There was a question about, you see in the report, $4.9 million as our 13-14 cost. And if you go into our expenditures under retired costs, it's more like $3.1 million. What the majority of that difference is an implicit subsidy. So at present, we charge retirees still on our plan the same as we charge active employees. But historically, and in our plan as well, retirees have a cost that exceeds that of active employees on the average. So included in that premium that we set for everybody is an implicit subsidy that covers the additional costs that retirees tend to generate. So that's the gap between those two numbers.
So remember that term, implicit
Beyond
subs.
the WRS, is that what we're saying?
Correct.
This is just health insurance.
Oh,
We're talking just health
oh,
insurance.
oh, okay.
Of course, because we have retirees, there's a higher cost to carrying the retirees.
Correct.
Age.
Correct.
They tend to have more services or more expensive services.
Okay.
So just remember that term, implicit subsidy. We're going to be coming back to that a little bit later. As I mentioned earlier, we're looking to make some changes to the current retirement benefit, but not remove it. We need to address the OPEB liability. And one of the reasons we asked our friends from Beneco to be here is to talk about all of those things in that third bullet point, because this is where it just gets really complex. But long-term, we have a long-term strategy. As you know, this is going to involve our health insurance plan design. And in order to try to keep this plan design at a rate that we will be in compliance with the Affordable Care Act and avoid the Cadillac tax, we we need to very carefully look at all of those components in conjunction with the retirement benefit. So,
And when we say we, I mean, this is important not only from a district perspective, but from an employee perspective, right? From, when you take a look at the Cadillac tax that could be coming up, that'll have an impact on each employee. So when we start to talk about trying to figure out what's the best route to go to meet all these goals, sometimes they're at odds with one another too. And so what we're trying to do, we're trying to figure out what's best for the district as a whole, while we're balancing all these things out. Taking the employees also into consideration, right? I mean, it's.
that's correct, and one of the, so, you know, going back a few years and looking at our plan design, we moved from the EAW to United Healthcare. There was some cost savings there, and we didn't change the plan design. Then we moved forward to try to contain some of those costs by making some tweaks to the plan design, and we've done that over the last several years. So I would say that every year there's something that we're looking to do in order to try to stem the tide or address the trend, so to speak. And the trend is, correct me if I'm wrong, it's between 8 to 10% per year, right? So if we're looking at a trend on a $20,000 a
An
year.
increase in premium.
Increase in premium,
Yep.
right. And if we're looking at a $20,000 a year family insurance plan, 8 to 10% will grow very quickly. So that's why we've had to look at our insurance plan design. And as you can, as you know, we're looking at a high deductible health plan, but we need to create something, again, with the employees in mind. You know, what is going to be their total out-of-pocket exposure, and what kinds of things can we do to minimize the impact on the employee, while at the same time keeping that cost of the benefit down, so we can avoid the Cadillac tax, we can be in compliance with the ACA. So you're getting the idea about how complicated it can be, and just when you think you're following me, all of a sudden we're going to use things like HSA and HRA and TSA, and that just gets into a whole other ball of wax. So you'll see why we're just giving you the 30,000-foot level tonight. Our goal, obviously, is to implement a retirement account, and what that looks like, HRA, TSA, whatever it is, we need to determine that, but it's going to eventually replace the current defined benefit plan. The defined benefit plan being $75,000 used to purchase health insurance in retirement. For some of our employee groups, that $75,000 can also be used to purchase up to 2 years of actuarial age penalties through WRS, but we're not even going to talk about that tonight. I don't want to complicate this conversation, okay? So let's just say that our defined benefit is $75,000 to be used for the cost of health insurance in retirement, and phase that out and replace it with a defined contribution plan. And so our goal is to help you understand what that looks like tonight.
I know, just before you go off, because I think there's a, when I see that 75,000, because I know why it's there.
You're not on the mic.
Yeah, Mike. When I see that 75,000, I know why it's there. It was part of what, we used to not have a cap on that. And what we ended up doing in our last contract with EAW was part of the agreement was to cap that number to cover all post-employment, like the WRS. And the problem I have with calling it a defined benefit relative to when you just lump it into healthcare, it doesn't, you know, it was only spent, let's say if the person, it was a maximum benefit that they could, not everybody got that 75,000. You know, things could happen where they didn't pull the full 75,000. Maybe they didn't have the expenses to take the full 75,000 during that time.
It's a technical term.
Yeah,
Defined benefit
We're
is a
using the term
technical
defined benefit as,
That's what it is.
yeah.
How is it structured?
pardon me?
How is the benefit structured?
I think she's trying to avoid that complication.
I mean, I can tell you they had up to 8 years to use it.
Okay.
So it had a end date.
It did have an end date.
Yeah.
Okay. So it was capped at 75,000 and it had an end date.
Right.
Which, that putting that cap on that benefit was probably the biggest, first big shift in our OPEB obligations. Because before that, there wasn't a cap, it was wide open. And by putting the cap on so there was a benefit to having a defined benefit defined at 75,000. Before, it wasn't defined. The cost escalation of healthcare.
It was 3 years full coverage, the next 2 years at the
Fine.
third year's rate, and then they could cash in sick leave.
But that's not defined
No,
by,
it's
that's
not,
not,
yeah.
the
It's not a
coverage can
number.
be anything.
It's not a concrete
Yeah,
number.
Yeah, so the idea was to give a concrete number that would limit our OPEB obligations.
Right, something we could budget against.
I think defined benefit is technically, it's a technical term saying what this truly is, right? I mean, it is a defined
It's a
What
type
if
of
we wanted
plan.
benefit type
Could
of
we,
plan.
could we define this?
By the defined by the government.
Define the definition of define.
So
Sure. Oh, go ahead, Lori.
I was gonna say, as opposed to a defined contribution is the other side of the coin.
So we've defined a benefit in terms of dollars and timing and things like that, but what we're talking about is really nailing down very specifically what the amount, the contribution to all future potential retirees may be, so that you can accurately reflect that in your liability. Because right now, as you've indicated, it's to a maximum of $75,000, and it could be stretched over a period of time. What we're going to try to, sort of open the conversation about is a specific dollar amount that you can take to the bank and say, our liability is X. It's not going to vary. And that's sort of the goal in the whole defined contribution. It's not much different, just transition, if you will. We're talking about health insurance here, but transition to the old pension plan days to the 401k days. The defined benefit of X amount of years of salary replacement to X amount of contribution by the employer as a 401k match or profit sharing, et cetera. So parallel that as we talk through.
I guess I have a problem with that characterization because in this case, what we really kind of said is, here's $75,000 that really is a promise of $75,000 sometime in the future when you retire. It didn't have an escalator on it. It was $75,000. So whether you were employed in year 5 in the district or year 25 in the district, all you were promised or assured of was $75,000, providing you made it to the retirement age under those set terms and conditions. And it's more like, instead of being something that's variable, like a salary or insurance, because insurance goes up, salaries go up, different things go up. It's almost like setting up a savings account, a guaranteed savings account of $75,000 to be used for expenses or for some sort of retirement benefit over an 8-year period. So it was a fixed amount. The problem is if we change it from a fixed amount in the future and roll that into today, it makes those dollars more expensive, because future dollars are cheaper than today's dollars.
I guess we're getting caught up in defined benefit, defined contribution. I think maybe if we could go to the concepts, because everybody comes in with a different perspective and different definition, I would just encourage us to do that, because we might be able to sit and just talk through that for the rest of our time.
Okay,
That's all right?
sure.
The assumption,
Lights work, so you don't have to keep passing
okay,
it around.
there's, okay, thanks, Lori. The assumptions that we're making here are based on a discussion that we had with the Board of Education at a work session like 1.5 years or 2 years ago. It was a long while ago. And since then, we've been working to try to develop something that is affordable and meets all of the goals that we're setting for ourselves. So one of the things that we heard was that there was some interest in grandfathering some employees. So, you know, whether it's everyone who would be eligible for retirement right now would be grandfathered in, everyone who would be eligible within 5 years, and, you know, from now until within 5 years, or from now until 10 years, there'd be a grandfathering of some of these employees, so that they would have the plan that has been in place since it was bargained in the 10-11 contract, 09-11 contract, and you know, then they would know what they've had, and they could go with that. Transitional employees would be people that would be somewhere between brand-new employees and those grandfathered employees, and there would be somewhat of a phase-out of the current plan and a phase-in of the other plans, so that there wouldn't be necessarily a sharp reduction in the benefit, but there would be an opportunity to have a portion of the traditional district benefit combined with whatever the new benefit would be, so that there would be a similar amount for those employees. And then for new employees, or employees that have, say, more than, that have more than 20 years before retirement, would be completely on the new plan. So that's how we were looking at this. Basically, 3 groups of employees, varying levels of transition. And we did work with Steve Hansen from Milliman to develop a plan that would reduce our OPEB, or eliminate our OPEB benefit, and fully fund this over the next, well, I guess he figured it to be about 2054. So the considerations that we've discussed, and believe me, we've discussed them for hours and hours, were how much to contribute to employees and when, how long the benefit eligibility duration, so how long someone would be eligible for a particular benefit, where to get coverage, health insurance coverage. Is this the district coverage? Would they go on to the exchanges and get coverage? We talked about all of that. Retired employees, would they be, that's where to get the coverage. Would they be on our plan? Would they be off our plan? And I'm skipping a bullet here, the implicit subsidy rate impact. So if you're a retiree and you're on a plan, and statistically you are more expensive to have on the plan, then would the retiree rate be a different rate than the active employee rate? Right now it's not, but many school districts are going to these separate rates where the retirement rate is higher to take the subsidy off the actives, and then the actives would be paying a lower rate. The future of the actuarial reduction penalty benefit, which is the last time I'm mentioning that here tonight. We can talk about it later, but I don't think it's going to be our topic tonight. The whole defined benefit, defined contribution conversation. Which vehicle is best? Meaning, is it a TSA, a 403B, or is it a 457, or is it an HRA or an HSA? And we're going to talk about what the differences are. And we can differentiate by group of employees. So administrators could have one benefit, teachers another, support staff another benefit. So these are all the considerations that are swirling around this discussion. This is where we're getting into the nitty-gritty, folks. District contributions, and let me just see where we're at here. So. I'm trying to decide the best way to discuss this slide. The assumptions that were made in coming up with a plan, and this was Steve Hansen creating this plan that, you know, we could actually put numbers to and say this is how it would work and this is how what we would have to pay for it, and this is how we would fully fund it. The assumptions are that annual district contributions would be made to a retirement savings account, whether that's HSA, HRA, whatever it is, while the employee is active. And then after the employee exhausts their retirement amount, so say the $75,000, the member would be no longer eligible for the district plan. So right now, an employee that has used up their retirement benefit can stay on our plan, but they receive a bill from UHC. Okay? In this assumption, they wouldn't be able to do that. They would have to, we would have to give them other options for insurance. Retiree premiums counting against the district benefit would be paid at self-supporting rates. That's the implicit subsidy. So that was another assumption that was made when the numbers were being crunched, that the retiree premiums would be higher than the actives. And all employee groups would be subject to the benefit cap, including those who currently have a cap stated in years. That is Steve Hansen from Milliman, just looking at what do we have right now, and let's just keep this cap. Did I say that okay, Lori? Yeah, okay. All right.
So who owns the savings vehicle?
That's to be determined,
Depends.
depending on the vehicle.
That's a pretty big assumption as well, who would own it.
Well,
Can
depending
they-
on whether it's an HSA versus an HRA determines ownership.
Right, okay. And then how about, can the employee contribute to themselves?
Another assumption.
Depends.
Another assumption.
I wish
You're
Todd
just
was here.
starting to understand the fun we've been having.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wish Todd was here because this is actually a depiction of something that he scratched on the whiteboard in the other room and said, this is what our goal really needs to be. So the green portion is the district plan, and using a proposed method for moving away from the 75,000 and moving into a annual contribution into an employee's account, that we would decrease those contributions over a period of years. Meanwhile, we would be increasing contributions into another savings vehicle so that people in these transition years are receiving both kinds of benefits. And the farther out you are from retirement, the closer you are to receiving the new benefit or more of the new benefit. And as far as the amounts go, the person that retires in 2040, for example, that amount could be higher or lower. It depends on what we decide. This is just this is an illustration only so that you can understand what we're talking about. People that are within 5 years of retirement, they would receive the 75,000, and then moving further away from that, the others would receive a combination of the two benefits. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. I guess I have a hard time with the overall concept. Right now, that benefit's payable upon retirement. That's when they draw that $75,000.
Right.
Correct.
Okay. And to convert it into a different way, we'd be paying it throughout their employment,
Right.
depending upon how we do it. Whereas, let's say an employee that retires in 2040, $75,000 in 2040 is gonna mean almost nothing. And if we move it from the flat rate of 75,000 to a HSA type arrangement, that money is going to grow much greater and much larger than the 75,000 that's promised to them today. So I don't see the savings coming to the district over the long run if we go to that type of conversion. And that's just, maybe I'm looking at it wrong, but that's just kind of the way I'm.
Well, keep in mind, one of our goals was try to eliminate the OPEB liability. And and either you have no retirement benefit, which makes it go away, or you start actually putting money aside now to fund it. So that was one of the assumptions, is that we would go more to a defined contribution, saying, I'll put X aside. Where it ends up at retirement is purely a combination of your years of service or interest rates or whatever, but we're not guaranteeing you an end result.
Well, if that's one of our goals, to eliminate the OPEB liability, I'm not sure that's the proper goal, because having an OPEB liability is not a problem, it's whether it's funded or not that's the problem. Okay? If we end up coming up with a plan that costs us a lot more money so we can get rid of a liability that costs us a lot less, that's not a win.
Again, it's also got to be affordable.
Okay, so,
Yeah, it's another ball we're juggling.
So we attempted to boil this down into 3 simple questions. How much will we contribute to the employees for their retirement? What is the savings vehicle that we will use? And how are we going to pay for it? We just want to answer these 3 questions, but I don't think we're going to tonight, but I think we're already getting some feedback from each of you already to help guide us in the future. We do have some, we're not coming in here completely, blank slate. We do have some recommendations, and we'll talk about steering you to those recommendations and why we think that would be a good thing for us. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to Justin and Jeff, and because these are the people that do this every single day and can, I think, explain it to you better than I can. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. Can you guys hear me okay? Or do
You
we
just
need
want to make
switch?
sure you don't
It's
get
the-
feedback between the two. That's just for the
people on
TV system.
They want to know how much
I
money.
think you just push that button.
This button here?
Yeah, I think so.
Is it on
There's
now?
at least 1 million people watching you right
Oh, boy, all
Just
right.
tap it
You're
and
famous.
see.
There we go. Okay, good. So, as Chris indicated, what we're going to talk about is not, the concepts are not siloed. We would love to be able to say, every one of the decisions you're going to make are mutually exclusive and they are not intertwined in any way, shape, or form. That, as you well know, is not the case, particularly when we layer in the complexity of the Affordable Care Act, which is a goal out there, out in the distance. So what we're going to talk about today, this evening, are some more alphabet soup for you about the pros and cons of a variety of different funding vehicles that are available to the district. So we're not here to tell you tonight that there's one that's going to be an answer. What we want to do is educate you such that you have a good feel for the pros and cons of each of them so that a healthy dialogue can begin. Fair enough? So with that, we're going to go through each of these, and what you're going to find is there is no perfect fit because they all have their own pros and cons. But please ask questions because this is getting into the weeds of these. So let me first explain an HRA, a health reimbursement account, governed by the IRS, Section 105. And we say here that the HRA would be a good fit with the exception of it's subject, unlike many of the other vehicles that we're going to talk about, or some of the others, it's subject to non-discrimination regulations. So what does that mean? That means that, bullet point number 2 underneath there, the contributions amount must be uniform and cannot be based on age or years of service. Well, as a retention tool, that flies in the face of an HRA. Now, one of the reasons why we would, you're looking at me and say, well, why are we even talking about that? The benefits of an HRA are very significant. The district controls the dollars. It can be an accrued liability, it can be funded. You can determine the vesting. You could determine the rollover. So there's a lot of control around the financial aspects of the HRA, but one of the big drawbacks is this whole notion of the non-discrimination and the bullet point number 1, the lack of clarity on the measurement point. So what council says is this, is that the regs today don't have clarity on whether you measure whether you're discriminatory or not at the beginning point of your deposit date or the end point of your withdrawal date. Well, clearly, if it's the end point of your withdrawal date, there are going to be discriminatory issues because someone's going to withdraw much more than someone else. That is going to be a challenge. The other thing is the third bullet point there, before we move on, is that the regulations are likely to change over the next 3 years. We've been waiting and waiting and waiting for clarity on these regulations. And so when we talk about HRA, we say it has some of the niceties of control that we like, but it flies in the face of a long-term retention tool which we can discriminate and provide stronger benefits to those who have been with the district longer. Make sense? So that's the health reimbursement account.
The contribution amounts cannot be on years of service or age, but can it be a percentage of salary?
It probably
Not
could,
be discriminatory. Because that is one way.
a percentage of salary still could potentially be construed as discriminatory because the highly compensated are simply going to get more. And again, it depends on that, point number one, the clarity around, and this is, the attorneys really get concerned about this. There's enough risk to the district or any organization out there that we really don't have ruling on whether it should be if we could say percentage of salary across the board at the beginning date, then we'd be fine, but there isn't the clarity yet.
Okay.
And the other thing is, we want to make sure that as we move through this process, you have eyes wide open to any regulation changes that might occur so that we're not knee-deep into this in a year and a half, and you've selected this after a year of diligence, and now you have new regs facing you a year after you've selected a plan.
But where those discriminations exist, so like highly compensated versus those that are less compensated at the low end, aren't there tools in place that kind of balance that out, right? You can,
Can the employee contribute to this?
Good question.
Because
So
that
let
would
me,
definitely balance out the,
tools to balance out, I'm not exactly sure if I understand.
well, that the highly compensated people, since they are compensated from a salary perspective greater, I thought that some plans could say, hey, if you're under a certain threshold, then you get extra towards the HRA.
There
Does
is,
that exist or not, to help balance out?
there is
that
flexibility,
that
and you
discrimination?
could, for instance, you could provide a greater benefit to the non-highly compensated if you wanted to try to get around that discrimination. But by the time you do that, you've almost defeated the purpose of
Right.
what you're trying to accomplish.
Right.
Now, on the HRA, employer district money only by IRS code, no employee dollars can go in, like the next thing we're going to talk about, which is an HSA.
okay.
We good on HRA?
Yes, sir.
All right. HSA. So, we like the HSA. Your employees would like the HSA, particularly because what we're saying here is it's an excellent choice, but it requires a 100% immediate vesting. So, whereas your current liability is just that, it's an accrued liability, the HRA could be an accrued liability with all sorts of strings attached. The HSA is an immediate expense, 100% vested. So bullet point number one, if this is a long-term retention tool, that sort of flies in the face of that immediate objective, right? The other thing is, our team members here talking about this at great length, when you get into the weeds, you say, well, if we're going to provide an HSA contribution, the person's got to have a high deductible health plan as defined by the IRS. And we can't assure that if they're not covered by our plan here at the district, so it would really only be limited to our high deductible health plan participants. So we just eliminated a big swath. The loss of control of the funds, once you deposit those funds, not only is it an expense, it's 100% vested, it's the employee's money. It's in their account. You have no rights to them. Go forward. And then lastly, IRS deems that these dollars are not available for pre-65 health insurance purchase. So those individuals who are retiring, who are looking for this type of coverage, are generally going to be pre-65. They can't use HSA dollars. So again, it's got some of the components of what we're looking for, but a couple of challenges. So HSA, on the other hand, benefit, employees can contribute to HSA, and they can contribute substantial sums, over $3,300 per year single, over $6,600 a year family. So we've just compared and contrasted two of the more popular vehicles out there that are typically tied to health insurance plans, the health reimbursement account and the HSA, or the health savings account. Any questions on that? All right.
So in essence, there's fewer restrictions on how we, it's less restrictive than the HRA in many ways in terms of, well, I guess that's hard to say
No,
too.
because you would, and you know, for the purposes of this high-level discussion, and we'll show you a chart in the middle that, you know, is great evening reading for all of you. But you would really need to create uniform contributions for single, for family participants. So from a flexibility standpoint, if the district actually were funding it long-term, you wouldn't be able to do it really based on compensation or anything else like that either.
Is there income restrictions on the HSA?
No income restrictions, but there are age restrictions. Anyone who's
Right.
65 or over who's actually even covered in a high deductible health plan, they can't open it. So if you actually had people who are active employees, they couldn't. But no salary restriction.
No salary restrictions at all.
But IRS governed maximum annual limits of deposit.
What about tax implications?
It's pre-tax,
It is pre-tax?
pre-tax
What are the
deduction.
tax implications when you start drawing on it?
It will be taxed at
It will-
withdrawal.
At withdrawal,
Yeah.
at their rate?
Yeah, we're gonna go through some of the tax, because again, so, you know, we're trying to talk about a multi-pronged objective with a variety of different vehicles that all are somewhat putting a square peg in a round hole. You know, if we had a singular objective of saying to employees, we wanna fund your future health care liability while you're working, we'd say the HRA and HSA without regard to OPEB liability, you stick with those two. But we don't. We have a long-term view of this as well. We have OPEB liability to think about, and we won't have retention to consider. And so that's why we have these multiple objectives that we're really trying to grapple with and achieve. That there's no real clear cut.
We may have to prioritize those objectives.
Prioritize the objectives will need to happen.
Survivability. Married, you pass away, transferable benefit?
Yeah, great. So HRA, no. HSA, yes. The other two vehicles we'll talk about, yes.
Because you do own, I mean, it's your,
Correct,
you own it.
correct.
And what happens to the survivors in the event both you and your spouse pass away? What happens to the account?
Right?
The funds that are in the account?
I would think that a surviving, I don't know the answer to this for sure, but I would imagine that a surviving spouse who owns title to that would then direct that to survivorship as well, just like any other asset. Whether it's HSA or some of the other vehicles that we're gonna talk about.
Is it,
Very similar to an IRA.
Yeah,
Individual
it's similar
retirement
to,
account.
yeah, think of it as medical IRA.
how do you divide that one up?
I'd be more concerned about the estate tax on it.
And if I can just point out, it's limited to the high deductible health plan participants, so you have to be in our insurance plan to even have the account. So that discourages people from going on their spouse's account.
Yeah, so thank you for pointing that out, Lori. So we want to create an incentive for people to select the best opportunity for them. We, you know, as a district, you want to provide benefits, but if they have better benefits at their spouse, you know, we'd like to encourage employees to fully consider their options. This would draw them into your plan, because the only way that they would be able to get the HSA contribution is if they were a participant in your health insurance high deductible health plan. That's counterintuitive to one of the objectives of allowing people.
If we go to something like a multi-level plan though, how, I mean, we have to change the benefit level? If we go to a high deductible plan, let's say you wanna stay, you wanna stay in the district's plan to get this benefit, but you may want to pay less of a premium, so you go into a high deductible account.
Mhm.
And your spouse has something that's better, so that's why you're on the high deductible account. You carry a little bit of insurance to offset any major losses.
Yeah, I see where you're going.
You still want to, we wouldn't be paying that benefit out at the same rate then, I guess, I would assume.
Well, because, well, first of all, that person could select the high deductible health plan for themselves and allow the spouse to do their
Right.
thing. So that
Yeah.
would be totally acceptable, but that would also be drawing that person continuing into your plan, incurring claims costs just to receive the HSA contribution for future or current, retirement plan needs. So that's part of the counterintuitiveness of that. Now, again, whether you're single or family is going to determine the contribution. There's no long-term kind of scale that we can grade based on years of service, age, job classification, any of that with HSA. It's locked and loaded according to the IRS based on your coverage category. So that's another drawback.
But, what I see, and you don't have to give incentives to people to be into a district plan, generally speaking. Because a district plan is usually a better plan than the private sector plan. And also, the private sector entities are being more forceful at avoiding dual insurance. In other words, they're pushing their employees to take their spouse's plan with somebody else and to get because they want to get everybody off their insurance rather than keeping them on the insurance. So how much incentive do we have to give to get people to participate in our plans?
I think you raise a good point that you have a natural built-in incentive because you're currently a plan of choice. What this does is it maintains you as a plan of choice regardless of what your plan design. We could go to a $5,000 high deductible health plan that people would think would be atrocious. And for the record, we've had no conversations about that, and I'm not suggesting that. But as an example, if that's the only way that they would get a retirement plan contribution, now they'd start thinking about, well, I'm still gonna be on the health plan. Okay?
I gotta
Go
throw
ahead.
this out there because I'm a little, wanting to be competitive with other districts. But at the same time, there's a gentleman who lives across the street from me who is a business manager for a small school district, and they've just decided flat out they're not going to have retiree benefits and health insurance.
That's a question this board's gonna have to grapple with.
That would be one of our assumptions that we have to determine.
Whether or not we're gonna offer it at all.
Yeah.
Be like the number
I
one
mean,
assumption.
are we better off just offering to buy, an Obamacare plan for retirees?
Put them on the exchange.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of a broader discussion. I think we're heading that way, relatively speaking. I mean, putting the cap on was one step in that direction. If we're paying a premium for our retirees, then I think it's worth looking at the incentive, coming up with an incentive to move our retirees off our plan. I don't think we can just say, but we need to come up with a way of encouraging them to use those dollars more cost-effective rather than paying for a very expensive healthcare plan, which is what they end up having to do today versus what they could probably get on the federal marketplace. So but those things change. They're going to continue to change every year as they go through the Affordable Care Act. And, if the new Congress coming in, we don't know who the president's going to be 2 years from now, it can complain, we can make changes today and it could be altogether different tomorrow. So.
Yeah, and I would just say this, that what we're sharing with you today is based on the premise that there is some form of retiree benefit moving forward. And that's that's the premise under which we've been given directive. If that directive changed, then this body's gonna have to give that to this team, I think. The one thing that you talked about, though, and I want to just, Chris mentioned it a few times, this implicit subsidy. I just want to drill down on that, because that is a key component of the Millman study, and that is this, is your pre-65 retirees on your health plan are much more costly than your active employees, and your active employees are bearing the cost of that. There's no two ways about it. What's that worth? In real terms, that's worth a 50% increase to the retirees and about an 8% decrease to the entire active population. That's what we're talking about. It's significant. So when you see those reductions in OPEB liability, that implicit subsidy is a substantial part of that. And having the conversation about allocating cost based on where the cost center is another conversation that's somewhat mutually exclusive to certainly mutually exclusive to the funding vehicle going forward, but not to the savings overall, if that makes sense.
But looking at that subsidy, it lends us to the point where, you know, under the Affordable Care Act, we're required to provide health insurance to our employees. And of course, we do it anyway, but that's the requirement. Retirees aren't our employees. Retirees are a benefit that comes from their employment over years that we've maintained.
Correct.
It doesn't say that we couldn't have a separate plan for retirees to enroll in that our employees don't subsidize, still giving them a health care plan that they can buy into, or continue to give them their benefit, let them buy their own plan. You know, they have a choice of buying off the district plan. Effectively, we'd be an exchange. We'd be one more option to the exchange for our retirees. And then we could decouple that penalty from our employees and help them avoid this tax that's coming up. Isn't that the more reasonable way of going about this?
That is an additional strategy. And that is a strategy that you might want to consider regardless of what you decide to do on the whole funding the OPEB and funding the retirement plan, because that is what, as Chris said, that's what a lot of districts are considering.
And that currently is not an option under our plan.
Well, it's not an option because we can change our plan.
Right,
Yeah.
it needs to be part of the conversation,
Right.
what
I
do we want
mean,
to accomplish.
we do know we want to accomplish avoiding the Cadillac tax.
Mhm.
And 8%'s a big number, right? If we can drop the 8%,
It's a significant number.
yeah,
It buys us one more year of trend,
right.
right?
And, you know, we're over by, what percentage now would we be over if that Cadillac tax is in today? We're probably over by a good 10, 15, 20%.
I don't have.
Today, I don't believe we're over.
We're not over today.
We're not
but
over
the question
today.
is, will we be over in 2018? I don't have those numbers.
I think
right
it's,
off-
I think it's close.
We're
if I
very,
recall
very
correctly.
close.
So the 8% would give us the cushion
$8% would likely give us
we
Cushion.
need.
Yeah.
Okay.
to avoid the 40% excise tax. So I'm sorry for taking you back to that implicit subsidy, but, you know, in this context, there's a lot of different things to talk about. So,
Just a quick question about participation in our health plans. I have read some things, and, you know, the Affordable Care Act is a mess, that there are things in the Affordable Care Act that's going to require or promote 100% participation from our employees and dump the spouses. For instance, I have read some opinions of the law where a spouse of an employee, her or his insurance provided by us will be taxable income at one point in the Affordable Care Act as a funding mechanism for the act,
okay.
which will go and push eventually, depending on what we offer, that spouse to their other, if they're employed somewhere else, to their.
What you might be referring to in the Affordable Care Act is the affordability. Affordability is one of the three tests. Are you going to provide coverage? is it affordable, and does it meet minimum actuarial value? The affordability clause of the ACA states that if an employee pays more than 9.5% of their earnings for single coverage, it's deemed unaffordable and the district is in play for penalties from the federal government, okay? There is no measurement with regard to the spousal cost.
Okay.
It's all about the employee single cost today.
Right.
What that many commentators would suggest is the glide path over the next 5 years will be employers allocating resources from family subsidies to single subsidy to maintain affordability. And if we pay 80% today of single and family coverage, in the future, the speculation is you may continue to pay 80% of a growing number, and the subsidy to the families will decline because you'll need that pot of dollars to subsidize.
And that-
So from a tax standpoint, there's nothing in the law that says that will be taxable, but what we speculate is the subsidy of family coverage will be reduced
Okay.
as a result of trying to fund the continuing escalation of overall and stay penalty immunized.
I'll just add that there has been a lot of speculation that it will become a taxable
It won't
benefit.
become a taxable benefit.
Right,
But that's
but that's
speculation.
speculation
Well-
at
Yeah,
this point.
there's nothing in the law.
And you know what? If we worked off speculation, we'd be talking about President Mitt Romney today instead of President Barack Obama.
But if you speculated incorrectly. It's, well, speculation and interpretation of law are two different things. There are pieces of that law that could be interpreted.
There's nothing in the law that says that spousal coverage will be taxable.
Right.
What it does say is that all employers must report the value of your benefits on a W-2,
On W-2.
Which we currently are doing.
Taxes.
okay? And
Yeah, no,
with the purpose of the Cadillac tax in 2018, reporting excise tax, which will be levied on the district, but don't think for a moment that they don't have other ulterior motive to say at some point in time, are we just gonna provide a cap on what's a tax-free benefit? You know, so that's all speculation
Yeah,
as well.
that's, yeah, no,
We'd be here all night on speculation.
Yeah.
well, yeah.
So we've got HRA and HSA. Let's talk about some other non-health benefit-related vehicles. TSA, a 403B. So the HRA and HSA were tax-free benefits. The 403B is not a tax-free benefit, it's a tax-deferred benefit, okay? The other thing is it comes up with a couple hang-ups here. The dollars are not available until 59 and a half, really. I mean, you can get at the dollars, but you gotta pay an excise tax, right? It's not any different than any IRS-governed retirement plan vehicle. And really, without a penalty, you can't access those dollars. It's not like a HSA where I've got money in, I can go out to the exchange, buy some health insurance, or, you know, even I've got this pot of money and I want to use it for current healthcare expense. You can't do that with a 403B, but it's not encumbered by non-discrimination. It's totally discretionary in terms of amounts for years of service. It's from a control standpoint, you set the guidelines and rules like the HRA. So we're moving from sort of a health-related accounts to retirement-related accounts that, again, some are going to have pros and cons. Then the 457, got a couple of things here. Advantages, the dollars are are available at separation. They are available pre-59 and a half, but they're taxed. Vesting is limited to $18,000 per year. That may or may not be an issue. At any given point in time, you may or may not, as a district, contribute more than 18. There are limited vendors, and you need to set up new plans. And so This plan has got some nice features, but again, tax deferred, limited vesting opportunities, maybe certainly not as flexible as a 403B. It's not tied to the health insurance. We can be discriminatory in terms of length of service, age, service requirements, et cetera. And then this is what I referred to in terms of your leisure reading. So what we've done is we've taken the HRA, the HSA, the 403B, and the 457 and said, you know, what accomplishes a variety of these objectives? And I would just, you know, I would just draw your attention to a couple key, I think a couple key things. You know, employer-controlled vesting. When do employees get at the dollars, right? I think from a long-term perspective, that's probably an objective. Even if you're funding it today, you want to be able to set some of the rules. You see that the HRI can do it, but we've talked a lot about the hang-ups there, particularly from the non-discrimination. HSA can't do it, 403B can do it, and we have some limited limited availability under 457. A couple of these others, you know, dollars available for pre-65 employer-sponsored, pre-65 employer-sponsored coverage. Only the HRA would allow that, so that's a pretty good equalizer between these others because, quite candidly, the HRA is sort of at the bottom of our list from a suitability standpoint for this particular vehicle. We have complications, you know, I said nothing's mutually exclusive. What happens if you have a retiree and then they come back in as an active? You know, we have to think through those applications. The dollar amounts, the contributions. There really are no limitations. Pretty sizable amounts here with the 457 and 403B. Much more limited
I
on
got a
these.
question. 53,000, I mean, that's not the normal limit.
What's that?
That's a different limit than your normal limit on a 403B.
The 53,000?
I mean, isn't it's the same thing as a 401K for the rest of us, right? A 403B is the normal retirement account that you can contribute to.
For not for profit, right?
Yeah, for government.
Right? Isn't that
That
some,
53,000, is that catch-up provisions and all that added
Mhm.
together? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so you're correct, it's not the normal limit, it's the maximum if an employee's doing catch-up provisions. There's, if you're a certain age, you can increase your funding.
Right.
If you haven't contributed to the maximum for X number of years, you can do a catch-up, it's called.
Yeah, and there's,
oh,
and
yeah,
there-
there's that
and
special
there,
provision.
and
There's
there's
all these stacked
significance.
things.
When you get to those higher ages, they're pretty significant.
Yeah, there's that special, and, yeah, okay.
It helps to be gray.
Yeah, it does. Now, the other thing is, you know, they're all going to help us with the OPEB liability. The non-discrimination we talked about, that sort of knocks the HRA out. There are some non-discrimination rules around the HSA, which I alluded to, by virtue of the fact whether you're single or family, everyone has to have uniform contribution. The risk of the non-discrimination law changing, tax-free benefit. So we've got 2 tax-free benefits, 2 tax-deferred benefits.
What do you mean by tax-free? That has different meanings for different people.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
What do you mean by tax-free? Define tax-free.
Well, the HRA benefit, for example.
Yes.
If the district put in $500
Yep.
of a benefit
Mm-hmm.
into your account.
Yep.
And you drew that out for qualified medical expenses under 105H, which is the same as your cafeteria plan, you receive those benefits and you pay not a nickel in tax on it.
Okay.
Same
So
thing with the
truly
H.
tax-free.
Yep, same thing with the HSA. Truly tax-free. But as you can see, that also comes with some other strings attached. So this is really intended to start the conversation around these because as we've heard, prioritizing the objective and actually creating a list of the lesser of the evils that help us accomplish the objective is a conversation where we really need to head. And again, like Chris said, this is maybe more than a 30,000-foot view, but little deeper than that, but in order to move to the next conversation, this overview should give you a good idea of the options available, and these are the options. It's not like there are 3 or 4 other options out there, or we discarded 4 other options. These are really the options that are being used by other districts for these
Well-
vehicles.
It seems to me the 403B gives you the most flexibility. You could decide to give the benefit at X years of service, incremental over X years of service. Let's say you wanted to give an employee, let's say 20,000 or 403B after year 10, another 25,000 after year 15, 20, and 25 up to 80,000. It has the ability to grow because it's invested,
Tax deferred.
tax deferred, and we would wipe out the OPEB obligation at the same time. We'd result in employee retention value because you don't get it for,
Right?
except for after 10 years of service, 15, 20, 25, or per special contract agreement, depending upon how we handle our contracts going forward. And it allows the most flexibility, providing we don't hit limits for those employees on their contribution for their 403B. It sounds somewhat simpler, except for we don't end up with a high deductible health care plan linked to this. It's just eliminating our
Right.
OPEB.
Correct.
That would become a separate topic, how we deal with
Mhm.
implementing a high deductible
Right.
health.
Right.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Ms. Edstrom, is that correct? Have you thought of it that way as well, or not? I mean, you're nodding your head like you've
Yeah.
thought of this before.
I did, and our other school districts are going the 403B route as well. I think that the fact that the money isn't available until age 59 and a half is more attractive than age 65 for some of the other things. 457's available at separation. I think it's also a viable choice, but the 403B is something that most people understand, and you could make those contributions, like you said, at certain intervals.
Right, and that would get and they'd also benefit from that because it would be higher than the 75,000 that we currently have, and they would get some growth over those years. And I would say that we're seeing more and more educational professionals stay until 60 anyway.
Right, yeah. It would push the age of retirement a bit unless someone wanted to retire and just wait to access their 403B funds but you can use the money for anything then.
Right,
You wouldn't even have to use it to
Tied
purchase
insurance
insurance.
Right.
right.
And that gives the employee ultimate flexibility in retirement.
The downside is there's going to be more earlier cost to the district to contribute to that 403B than waiting until retirement for our employees. But it becomes a retention benefit that we currently don't have,
It does.
because we have experienced teachers leaving now.
And we have, that's the only option where we have the complete control over the vesting.
Oh, that's right, we can use it as a vesting constraint in
Yeah,
terms of
that's
them leaving. Once we give it to them, it's only vested
Right.
after 5 years in the fund. It might only be vested 5 years later, 5 years later, 5 years later.
We can
Will you
determine
tie a
that.
percentage of
There's-
vesting
well,
to
there's still a
number of
maximum,
years,
though.
is
You
what you're saying, right?
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, but there's a
Well, 10
vesting
years or
option
20.
there, we
can't
can
make it
tie into
30
that.
years of it, I mean,
You
have
wouldn't
to
want
vest
to
it
make
along
it.
the way.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's some plateaus.
Right.
The other thing with the 403B is you can pay it out after retirement, where something like a 457 has to be paid out upon retirement. And so there's flexibility in how we actually pay out that benefit.
And we could pay it out after, but then if we pay it out after, then it doesn't really help the retention issue.
Right, you could vest it over 5 years if you have a $53,000 maximum on an annual basis, but you are intending to pay out more than that, you can do it over 2 or 3 years after retirement is what I'm
Yeah,
suggesting.
but the problem with doing it after retirement, it just doesn't help that retention plan.
It's
But-
also not earning anything for
And
them.
it doesn't
that's
earn
Right.
anything.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, okay, well,
Right?
that's,
So, we started this conversation by saying this is, intertwined with a high deductible health plan. I just want to give you an idea of also what we're working on in creating this benefit offering for July rollout that would be an offering to the employees to select between the conventional plan that we have today and a high deductible health plan that would include a approximately $1,300 district contribution to the health plan. This is totally separate to the conversation that we're having about the retirement
But the
plan.
reason we're talking about it is because we can realize some savings by moving to a high deductible health plan, which will help fund the retirement benefit.
So one of the big questions, how are you gonna pay for this? And we've done a tremendous amount of modeling, had a lot of conversations about what benefit level we're comfortable with, and we, in our upcoming conversations, we'll be ready to share sort of a sneak preview on what's the possibility and how we're gonna pay for this over time. And the high deductible health plan will assist the district fund exactly what we talked about for the last, half hour, 45 minutes.
is it possible for us to, the idea is that, I guess we aren't gonna hit the Cadillac tax if we decouple the two plans, the retirement plan and the employee plan, but it would be possible for us to take those savings and use it as a subsidy to the premium too, right?
Good?
I mean, you didn't necessarily have to use it to put it if we would just say, okay, we're gonna be able to subsidize the premiums through these savings, and then lower the premium for the employees.
Yes, and there's, through the plan, and then also through the implicit subsidy, I'll get back to that as a potential. Yes. So you have options. But as Chris said, the questions that are looming out there are, how much are we gonna contribute? What vehicle are we gonna use? How are we gonna pay for it? And so hopefully the time that we spent tonight has at least helped you frame the conversation and maybe eliminate a few of the options that were swirling around so that we can distill this conversation on a go-forward basis and begin to focus a little more clearly on the vehicles, the amounts, and things like that in upcoming conversations. I think that's,
I guess one of the questions I've had is, when you look at the affordability clause, we have some of our employees that are on a very high-cost healthcare plan that won't make the affordability criteria,
Right.
I don't think, right?
this plan will be affordable. Your high deductible health plan will be affordable. So the high deductible health plan serves a number of purposes. Number one, it achieves the objective of providing a high deductible health plan. Number two, it achieves the objective of affordability under the Affordable Care Act. And number three, it provides savings to fund a potential healthcare retirement vehicle. So this is a key component that addresses all three objectives.
It provides savings that can be plowed back to the employees in some way.
Correct,
Whether it's option A, B, or C.
correct.
Okay.
So, next steps. And really in the December meeting, we expect to have recommendations so that not only will your conversation be framed by here are all alternatives, but we'll put some numbers to it, put some specifics to it, so that you can actually conceptualize what it looks like on paper and on a go-forward basis, so that it's not just for now, it's the beginning of a multi-year strategy.
The high deductible plan, is that's for a family too, right? 'Cause it's just
Yes.
a single. I just wondered-
$2,600 in-network deductible for a single, and it would be double that for a family.
It would be double that for a
Correct.
family.
And don't forget, you have this wonderful clinic that's now fully operating, that, in combination with the high deductible health plan, makes a very very attractive offer for an employee to get high-quality, low-cost health care.
Could you say that again about the wonderful clinic we have? And emphasize the word wonderful?
So would the $1,300 in district savings double on the family plan, or what does that look like?
It'd be
So-
50% contribution.
Okay. And the
Any-
maximum out-of-pocket would also go up to 5,200?
Yes, correct.
What's the deductible for the current family plan?
$1,350.
1370,
Oh, that, okay.
1375, yeah. So one of the things that we'd be looking at, and Beneco did provide us with a out-of-pocket stratification, so we know the percentage of people that have hit their out-of-pocket max, and the percentage that never spend more than $500 and all of that, so we'll be able to provide you with that sort of information next month as well, when we put our numbers to the paper.
So the IRS determines the high deductible policies?
Yeah,
Is there a
IRS determines
range?
what the minimum threshold is for high
Okay.
deductible.
What is the minimum threshold?
$1,300,
1,300 is the minimum threshold
minimum threshold,
for a high deductible,
yes,
and that's for a single? That's
for a single, right. But if we were to, just the reason why we're landing here at the 2,600 for a discussion point, if we go to a $1,300 deductible, the actuarial difference between your 675 and your 1,300 is peanuts.
Right,
It's not meaningful.
Right.
It's not gonna get anybody to move, we're not gonna deliver any savings.
yep.
So we've got to take sort of a bold step. But really, when you think about a 2,600 with a $1,300 district contribution, you're really telling employees, the first $1,300 of your health care is on the house. And if you don't use it, it rolls over. That's a pretty good deal. So we think we can create a win-win around that.
And a lower premium for the employee.
Correct.
So the 1,300 will roll over year over year. Is there a cap? Are you talking about a cap?
We can determine that depending on what vehicle we put the 1,300 in.
Right.
Would be very, yeah, well, that would be very attractive for someone who's not sick a lot, wouldn't it? A younger person?
So in addition to next steps, I see what we're doing in December. When do we have to make decisions by to put these things into effect?
You want to go ahead?
The interesting way our plan is currently structured is we have some people with calendar year deductibles, as in our teacher group. So January one, their plan starts, their deductibles start on, and then we have the rest of the world on the fiscal year. So, we're shooting to have information
Really?
available, by the January window. So as people are considering starting to transition, it's more dramatic for some groups versus others.
So can we change this at any time, or are there certain times where it makes sense to change it? You offered one reason to make a decision sooner than later, but, I mean, is there any restriction as to when, can we take 8 months on this decision?
It would be difficult to make a plan change mid-plan year.
Okay, so now you told me we have two,
Windows,
okay. So either in December,
right, so January
Or
1 or July 1.
June.
And there's complications for both of those. But
which one has less complications?
it would be the July one, and that's my opinion.
We were looking at a July 1 date to offer the high deductible health plan. And in order to do that, we need to communicate with employees starting in April and May,
Yeah, I don't.
May, June.
I personally, I don't think I'd be ready to make a decision in December on this. That's why I'm asking.
Right, it's not that we would have a plan in place for January 1.
Oh, okay.
It's that we would be working towards a plan to put in place July 1, so that those people on January calendar years kind of know what's coming down the road. Most likely, what we would end up doing is transitioning and allowing those people with those deductibles to actually do an 18-month deductible. We wouldn't make them start all over.
I guess I have the question of, why don't we just change to a high deductible plan and implement the benefit to the employee across the board, rather than giving it as an option to choose a low deductible plan versus a high deductible plan?
Yeah, we could do that. We discussed just making a switch, July 1st, everybody's on a high deductible plan. We also discussed a softer approach where there'd be like, maybe like this is the last year, and next year everybody goes to a high deductible plan, or 2 years. So we've talked about that.
Well, I think, from an administrative point of view, it's so much easier to administrate for the employees as a whole if it's across the board than trying to work with multiple plans and enrollments and.
We had also been operating from a perspective of giving the employees choice.
That was a
And-
directive this board gave you.
Yeah,
so.
and creating a plan where, it didn't matter to us actuarially which plan they ended up choosing.
So one of the goals was a cost-neutral impact on the
Yeah.
district.
So that we would avoid that whole adverse selection. The idea of sicker people would choose the richer plan, just really making the plans similar, just structured differently. And that whole idea of rolling over the savings account, I think we're looking at HRA for that, is going to be a very attractive option for employees. And also help drive making good consumer-driven decisions.
Yeah, but I guess I guess the board has their own perspective on that, but it seems to me that if we're making the switch to ensure that there's definition to the benefits for the district and for the employee, it's much harder to know what those benefits are when you have the ability to select. You're rolling the dice as to whether people will select option A or option B with the selection. Mr.
Yeah,
Coleman?
I mean, the discussions that you're referring back to are two-year-old discussions. Now we have a lot more information, and we just need to update ourselves on those conversations and remind ourselves of what those priorities are. And we may have to, going to that first or second slide on priorities, we may have to figure out where do we lie. Our priorities could have been different 2 years ago versus now, but we didn't have the details 2 years ago. We're trying to go through those now, and our priorities will drive the direction that we go in. But we can't attain all those in the same balance, or in an equal balance. Something's got to give.
Well, yeah, and you're right, because 2 years ago, we didn't think of the retiree subsidy, whatever we want to call that. What's the
Implicit subsidy.
implicit subsidy?
Learned a new term.
We knew it
tonight,
was
yeah.
there, but we really didn't have it defined. I
Right.
mean, and
We were measuring
we
it.
didn't know what the benefit would be in terms of that we could plow back to the employees in return for them being shifted to a high deductible plan. So it's not immediate out-of-pocket cost for them, oh, if I have something happen, it's gonna cost me $2,600. Yeah, but if nothing happens, you gain $1,300, and the odds are nothing will happen for a large number of a group of our employees, and $2,600 probably won't break the bank should something happen in the future for a large number of employees. Although there will be employees that currently will rely on that low, they don't have that extra $2,600 that they're currently, so. Okay. Any other questions? Anything from the administration?
We will be back next month.
It's guaranteed.
You'll be back. Okay. Okay. Well, with that, I guess the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.